I have to. Hello, everyone. Welcome to AOA Podcast. I just realized I made a few mistakes, and I was like, when I realized the mistake, I want to correct it a little bit too late. So I will have to go back to correct it once we finish this podcast.
Yeah.
One of those days is not Mercury retrograde, but you still want to plan and something else about
Mm.
why I make this interesting mistake. I just because I realized I typed June.
Ah.
Back to the future.
Oh.
Hello everyone. Hey, hi Marcus. Hi Mandy.
Hello, 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 hello. Mhm.
Let's come back to our monthly talk. So today, what are we going to focus? We have a lot of talking about. Also, if you read news, uh, at this moment there's a lot going on from all around the world, from Israel with Palestine, from France riot, and Russian. The situation is still unclear. I don't know what's happening there because it's all like little bit smoke, screen, something like that. It's kind of a very interesting, but it's okay because we are not going to focus too much about the mountain astrology,
No.
but we will talk about how we're going to apply those energy and those planet aspects in our life. So the first things I want to invite everyone go to have a quick look about the I think the full moon happened a couple of days ago with the Capricorn full moon at Capricorn 11 degree of Capricorn. And the one thing we notice is, well, the following, because this morning I had run a podcast with Christine Skinner, and she mentioned that for next three full moon, from this one to the 1st of August and then the 31st of August, all these full moon are super moon, a super full moon. The
Oh,
moon is
okay.
very close to the preach, so the
Perigee.
moon
Yeah.
was perigee, so much little bit bigger. So should I text share the
Yeah,
chart?
that would
Yeah,
be
let me
great.
just have to keep. We have a lot of things to talk about today because we want to cover the nodal axis shifting and at least nodal axis shifting, and if we can say something about the Venus spiritual great. But so we just have a few quick words about this full moon and how we feel at this moment. Okay, so let me share the chart here. Here we are. Here is the 3rd of July, the full moon at the 11 degree Capricorn, and then what kind of tribe Jupiter and the Sun tribe Jupiter, and also has aspect with Mars, but that's minus aspect not quincunx, the 60 quadrant with Moon 60 quadrant with Mars. So, well, where should we start?
Oh, it's, I mean, I guess that the easiest place to start for me traditionally would just be this is a relatively fortunate new moon, I mean, full moon rather, all things being equal, just because of the Jupiter being friendly to both ends of it, so that will tend to make any of the sort of tensions that can come out on a full moon uh, less crazy. I mean, the destabilizing aspect here is obviously you've got Venus and Mars pretty close together in Leo squaring Uranus. So that's I think the unpredictable element. So if you think about Venus and Mars as two of the sort of relationshipy planets, like
Hmm.
particularly in, should we say, adult relationships between consenting adults or something, the
Hmm.
square to Uranus would maybe bring out some instability. So with a full moon being everything being out on the table, and with the sun being in Cancer, which is an emotional water sign with Mercury at the time, it may be that around this time of full moon, speculatively, there would be some conversations which might bring to light a few emotional truths which could potentially destabilize some people's relationships, for example. But I would think with Jupiter being friendly to both ends of the full moon, there's a good chance of sort of being able to reconcile things. So that's, I mean, that's just one possible and very personal and specific
Mm.
example of how that could play out. That's how I see it. It's just like things coming out and being discussed, things coming out that maybe could be potentially a little bit surprising about people's relationships, or even shocking, but
Mm.
that might ultimately be worth discussing for sort of developing a more solid foundation for a relationship, for example.
Yeah, that is very interesting. I totally agree with Marcus, and I don't know why, because for a while my eyes always, no matter what I look at, the things happening in the mountain level or something, I always just like the attention is just try to draw when I look at the chart at this moment. It's always draw my attention on that Venus Mars things, and they just like you couldn't avoid them, and it's kind of interesting because from my view, it's like a little bit. I try to see it like a play, and this is the developing of a play since 2020, and this is like we are kind of nearly so called of what we call the middle of it, the middle part of it, intermission. So they you kind of they're going to kill, they're going to kiss each other,
and then they don't.
Exactly.
Yeah, because Mars steps into Virgo and suddenly gets all critical about Venus, and Venus goes, no, I'm not having that, and changes her mind. So that's what's going to happen next, folks. Spoiler alert. But I mean, what would you think that kind of Venus Mars stuff would? What are some examples of how that might be playing out on the world stage, Rod, do you think?
Talking about stage,
Mandy.
actually,
go on.
We can see there that Mars has got a aspect to Neptune there in that chart. And we talked about this, actually. Rod and I did a live on Insta, which you can still see probably on Rod's, it was on Wednesday, you can still see that on feed. And we were talking about that quincunx between Mars and Neptune. We were talking about sort of that thing about Leo and being on stage. You talked about the world stage, and that kind of just made me think, oh yeah, the stage. Leo obviously wants to be on stage. Okay, I mean, there's a part of Leo that is very kind of that shy pussycat, that offstage Leo is very different to the onstage Leo. Even the shyest Leo that you ever meet, you give them a platform and you'll see them shine on that platform. I've seen that in people that I know. And with that Neptune, that sort of glamour, that idea of fame, we were talking about the pop stars. Do you remember, Rod? We were talking about pop stars in this live, and the idea that the quincunx, they can't quite see each other. So the person will be in the audience watching their pop star who they fancy, and they fantasize about how wonderful it would be to be with him, but it's never going to happen because they never actually see each other. The next day, there was a really interesting news story that there's been a real trend, and not a very nice trend. I mean, it ties into Mars a little bit, a trend of people going to live concerts and throwing things at the singers. It's happened quite a lot. There was even one young lady, a singer, a young man who thought it would be fun to throw a phone at her, and she was actually quite seriously injured. She received facial injuries and cuts and bruises to her face, and it's become a bit of a trend, probably a social media trend as well. It's reminding me of that anyway, because also the intensity of the full moon is playing as well. You know, everything is open. You can see them on the stage, and they're bigger than they are. You get the glamour. You don't get the real person. You get the stage presence, and you want to get close to it. So it's like, let's just touch them in any way we can, and you try and touch them when there's a quincunx. It's never going to turn out too well because it might not be very well.
I mean, I that's fascinating. I think it's a really interesting analysis, like the lunatic element of the full moon coming in, you know. But I think also just that, like you're saying, the hunger for the spotlight that's present with Leo, particularly with Mars in Leo. I really think some sort of hunger for the spotlight is something. I mean, that could be one way it shows up. But I mean, as you guys know, I ignore quincunxes because I do trad astro, but I don't ignore the modern planets. And I can totally see that. By the way, it doesn't mean I don't think quincunxes are a thing. They are a thing. They work. I just don't play with them. I keep those toys in the box, but I do use the squares. And to me, that aspect is also, I think, what you're talking about, Mandy, that sort of like the quincunx with Neptune, the sort of longing and the sort of like the slightly delusional relationships people can have to, pop stars to their audience, that disconnect. But also you've got the square to Uranus is that sudden, like you're saying, it can be sudden assaults with square to Mars, and with the Venus involvement, it's almost like yeah, as you say, it could be people in the spotlight, glamorous people who are beautiful, or people who are valued, getting sort of like sudden assaults or something like that. So yeah, that would fit.
Kind of written twice. For the record, I'm a big fan of the quincunx. I'm not a fan of them because they're not easy, but I find them very, very fascinating and very interesting. It's different astrology, isn't it? So so many tools.
Those aspects work. They absolutely do work.
work.
I'm not gonna poop on the so-called minor aspects, because they're sometimes very revealing. It's just that it's you choose your tools, and those are I have other obscure tools like the Antisha that I bore people regularly that I use, and you know what I mean. So
yeah. I think it's.
I can't spell it. I still can't spell Antisha. I know what it is, and I know it works, but I can't spell it.
An astrologer of my acquaintance once said, "You're round your Aunt Tisha's house," so that always helped me remember the name. They're round their Aunt Tisha's house. I'm just like, that's awesome. Okay, anyway.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think this is a beautiful of astrology, is like everyone speak in the same chart, and we all spot on a different spot, and we all kind of using our own tool to read something, and eventually there will come a different angle to see the things, and it's about a different interpretation. And that was like I enjoyed it. Only thing going to cause problem is if some of us have a narrow mind and want to prove that I'm the only right and you all wrong, and that would be no fun, to be honest. So
we've all seen some of the social media posts of various astrologers who will not be named falling out, but nobody in this group.
No, so I mean, yes, so far, and I don't think it's going to happen. We've known each other for long enough, so but yeah, no, it's always a bit sad, really, because there's more than one way to look at things and to work things out. I would say skin a cat, but I like cats, so I ain't going to say that. It's not a nice phrase. Don't like it. But there's always more than one way to get to a thing, and I just think at the end of the day, these are all just different lenses. I mean, Rod, I was curious, Rod, what you thought about the Venus Mars, because I'm not a mundane astrologer, and I always have difficulty. So I always think like Venus is maybe like the world of fashion, or like something like the glamour, fashion, women. What Mars is war or about. So what would how would you interpret that on a more mundane level?
In mundane level, well, in one way, yes, we can like literally do something like a symbolic reading that Venus is come to try to calm down the Mars, because Mars in the fiery side a little bit a little bit too much, a little bit too hot, a little bit too extreme. And the Venus is trying to calm it down, but Venus eventually said, "No, I couldn't deal with you. You are unreasonable," and try to move it away.
So this could be like disrupted peace talks or something like that, or something like things are moving towards like maybe there's some elements coming in that are attempting to sort of like cool things down, and then there's a change of scenario when Mars bumps off into Virgo, and Mars gets really verbal and critical. And by the way, Mars goes to oppose Saturn at that point, so there's
very soon.
So I can see you're thinking of Mars as maybe some like war or some of the more like unstable events going on in the world, and Venus
very likely.
Okay.
Very likely. Yeah, very likely. I think something, especially if we look like this, I mean, next week it would be a lot of things, because next week we have the Mars going to move into the Virgo, and also the period what we call the moon wobble is coming up. So you can notice that, because the sun is going to move into when by next week the sun will start to square nodal axis. And that is one part of the moon wobble period, and that usually unstable. The energy is too strong, so that could be something started, and then that was the same time. Well, that's why we say we're going to cover it, because nearly same time, nodal axis change in the sign, and the Venus going to retrograde. So together, it's happening together. So it's like a pretty intense if we're going to look at for next couple of weeks.
Okay.
Here's another thing as well, with the intensity of these supermoons and the moon wobbles, and we've got the heat of Leo there as well. And it was reported that a few days ago, 2 or 3 days ago, the average temperature on Earth was the hottest it's been on record. Granted, the records only really started in the 1970s, so it's not going back too far, going back 50 years or so, but very hot temperatures. So that's interesting, because I just thought of that, Rod, because the moon wobbles can have things to do with the weather.
Yeah,
weather patterns.
definitely.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
Should we?
watch out for.
I would suggest, should we move to the new moon on the 17th of July, because
yes,
this
that's
one
coming up.
yeah, coming up, and this is the new moon, the starting of the Cancer new moon in July, and we have the sun and moon at 24 degree Cancer, and then I think that is, of course, opposite Pluto.
It's interesting. It's not only opposite Pluto, it is trine Neptune, sextile Uranus, and square Chiron. So again, it's a really kind of intense new moon, because it's a new moon. Of course, it's a dark of the moon, so a lot of it is going to be going on unconsciously, subconsciously, a lot going on behind the scenes. That might be, there might be a thought of, what's really going on. We don't quite know yet. Things are still yet to be revealed. New moon, and of course in a Cancer new moon, you've got double Cancer. So Cancer, as we know, is about home. It's about belonging, the sense of belonging. It's about looking for security and comfort, and it's very passive. It can be just like its opposite sign, Capricorn. It's a past focus. It looks to the past. It can be quite sentimental, Cancer. It's about finding and feeling one's roots, and it can be quite an empathetic sign as well. So there's some things. On the flip side, on the sort of more shadow side of Cancer, emotional, there's nothing wrong about emotions, of course, but those emotions can become manipulative, for example.
Emotional blackmail, I always think.
Emotional blackmail, exactly.
With Pluto's involvement,
with Pluto involved, power issues, that kind of thing. You get power and control, don't you? And then you've got that Neptune that just wants to run away and escape. And then you've got the Chiron, which kind of that can really kind of speak to your sort of inner woundings, your deep sort of trauma and woundings. And then of course the sextile to Uranus. Well, I mean, Uranus is often a catalyst, isn't it? It's when there's tight aspect, a wake-up call. So it's interesting. I'll be very interested to see how this new moon plays out, actually, both personally in people's lives, but also in the collective, because it's an interesting one with all those kind of connections to the outer planets.
It is, and I think that they're really spicy, but not in a way that you would want to eat thing in this chart. Is the Mars Saturn opposition, the approaching Mars Saturn opposition, that is chewy. Mars Saturn hard aspects are always a little bit gnarly. I mean, it's not plugging into the new moon itself, and Jupiter again is having a sort of stabilizing influence there, and as Manny you're describing all those, that there's but the moon is plugging into all the outer planets. So the way I might interpret that is what it really, to me, that it reinforces what you're saying about this new moon being opposed to Pluto and then stabilized by Uranus and Neptune, meaning that there's this like emotional intensity going on, this new beginning, sort of probably born out of some kind of feeling of emotional blackmail or sensitivity to manipulation, or sort of forces that you can't control, and that sort of the Uranus throwing in an element of let's break free and do things completely new, and Neptune sort of going, and we can make this what we want it to be, sort of like, but none of those are really stabilizing. Those are all sort of elements of wobbly, really. And then the Mars Saturn, what that injects a feeling of frustration, a feeling of fatigue, and a feeling of trying to push against obstacles. But the way that can really show up here is Mars is in Virgo, which is a loud voiced human critical sign, and Saturn is in Pisces, which is a mute emotional water sign. So what this kind of is Mars is kind of like verbal criticism against a wall of silent emotional disapproval. That's what that feels like. Do you know what I mean? It's something like that. So the vibe around this new moon is, and for this next lunar month, is kind of a bit of kind of a sort of new beginning born out of these kind of this sort of, I think, fear of criticism and or some emotional blackmail-y stuff going on.
Passive aggressiveness.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, it's not. I wouldn't say it's volatile so much as just frustrated. But it's an interesting one, and it'll affect people differently. I mean, I'm sort of anticipating it because that Mars is right on my midheaven, and the Sun and Moon are right on my natal Mars, and the midheaven is close to my ascendant. So this is going to be an interesting month for me, and I already have some idea of what that might be. But I think I don't, because this new moon I think will hit my chart specifically. I don't want to project my interpretation of the world because there's always a danger of that. I think there are some positives here, which is that this could be a time where the thing about Pluto oppositions is that, unpleasant as it may be to encounter being scapegoated or monsterized or triggered by I don't know, having one's identity apparently torn down. It's usually simply a reaction to your internal, like it's almost like you are afraid of being something that other people then see you as, like other people project onto you your worst unconscious judgments of yourself. Do you know what I mean? And there's some ultimate therapeutic value in experiencing that individually and collectively. And I certainly see that because, you know, America's coming up to its Pluto return. I certainly see that in the collective political identity in the world. Left and right are monsterizing each other to a degree that is just unbearable. And like, it's like what people see when they see monsters in others is the worst ideas about themselves that they cannot accept projected onto others very often. And I think this new moon is saying something about that, I think, but I don't know.
It's funny, I had a funny thought when you were talking there, Marcus, that, and this doesn't refer to you, and I'm talking figuratively, but I'll just add, first of all, this is a new moon, so this is a temporary transit. When we're talking about the Pluto, it's temporary, it's just for a few days. But I had this thought about needing a good wash or a good cleanse. You know, you've got all this Cancer stuff here, and then you've got the Saturn in Pisces as well, the Neptune in Pisces. It's almost as if, you know, you need to sort of go and I don't mean literally go and have a good wash, although it might be that, but it's just things getting muddy and wobbly and like dirty, and just having a mental cleanse and emotional cleanse. Get down to the sauna or something.
Yes, you know? Actually sauna or hotboxing or something like that would be great for Saturn Mars. Something like a sauna or a hotbox. Virgo wants to clean things up. Mars likes heat, and Saturn is wet. So some sort of like a hot steam or just exercise in sort of like hot yoga, hot boxing, something like that would be great. Hot boxing, I'm referring to hot boxing as sauna, by the way, not the other meaning of that, which is not something that probably help at this time.
That went over my head anyway, so don't worry.
Okay, good, fine. So yeah,
Pluto loves a purge as well, doesn't it? Of course.
Yes. Yeah, no, that's brilliant, Mandy. And because Saturn in Pisces could also be like dirty water. So what is the potential? Yeah. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I don't know. I think there are some positive potentials from this new moon. I just think when Pluto's involved, and I speak as someone with a Sun, Moon, Pluto in my birth chart, I kind of think there's always an experience of being scapegoated in some way. Now, this will pop up in the collective in various ways, or people sort of being singled out and monsterized and whatever. And I think that at the end of the day, that the value of that is not in the events themselves. It's in the recognition after the event that everyone was acting out their shadow. And I think that's the value of this. I don't see this chart as being super bad. It's like that the sextiles to Uranus and Neptune and the trines to Neptune do bring in the possibility of sort of finding creative new solutions from whatever issues are sort of triggered here. And I think, Mandy, that solution of sort of maybe just going for sauna, or just even having a really like scrubbing your floors or something, like using that Mars in Virgo with the Saturn in Cancer, like just, you know, like literally having a hot bath, having a sauna, or just scrubbing the floors or something, just doing some of that energy to sort of clean things with water, and using a bit of energy to do so might be a good way of sort of transforming one's mood or perspective around the time. I don't know. Yeah, I totally agree with both of you. And Marcus really point out one thing in astrology: this set of aspect, this opposition between the new moon and the Pluto. Yeah, we can always dramatize or always demonize about the something horrible going to happen, or always say something negative. I'm usually the one because I usually tend to see it like, oh, but then astrology, oh, something bad is going to happen. I have to warn everyone first. But I love that thing. It's like sometimes when we see something, especially like you use the example of the polarized of a different view, and we try to demonize the another side, and that is really beautiful and make us to, I have to say, reflect about what we say, what we see when we criticize something, you know, or criticize someone. It's like if you look into the mirror, you maybe were scared about yourself. Say, oh my God, that's me. I think that was a couple days ago. I was chatting with a friend, and I was surprising by his view of the maybe support some unpopular or very popular by certain people, a little bit controversial figure, and I was so angry about it. I was kind of criticized, and suddenly he was like, "Why are you so angry?" Interesting.
I just started looking at me. That is very interesting. That is very, and so it's a time to reflect, and that is. Thank you, Marcus, for bringing that out. I think that new moon opposite Pluto has that function. Maybe we can easily to say it's all your fault, or it's all their fault.
Yeah.
But in another way, maybe, you know, think about it, hold it up, and I like that Uranus and Neptune. I was thinking that help us to welcome the change. Because the time is very, very different now.
I'd agree. Visualizing new possibilities is how I'd see that sort of Neptune, Uranus in helpful aspect to the new moon. So visualizing new possibilities. The challenge is the Pluto end of it, which is the bit where people project their stuff. You know.
Wait, I would suggest before we move into the next topic, I would say, should we start with the Venus retrograde motion? But before that, Mandy, you want to add anything in for this new moon chart?
No, I think that's it. I think that's a fantastic analysis.
No, I'm so happy that the nodes which we're going to talk about now are changing sign. I'm so happy. I'm so happy.
So which one first, Venus or node?
Whichever, doesn't matter. We've got to talk about them both.
Let's talk about Venus first, and Venus, and that quickly. Talking about the Venus, because the Venus is going to retrograde from the 28 degree, I think would be on 23rd. Yeah, so, and from 21st or something, Venus will be appear kind of from next week, maybe in 2 weeks' time, Venus will appear kind of a stationary during that time. But I think it's 28 degree, yes, Venus definitely 28 degree. Retrograde from 28 degree on 23rd of Leo. So, 28 Leo. Yeah.
That already very slow, isn't it?
Yeah.
Venus is already very slow in Leo. And as you can see, by the time we get to this new moon on the 17th of July, Mars has moved on from Leo into Virgo. But Venus in Leo, I mean, Venus, as we know, is about relationships. It's also about creativity and beauty. And you were talking about sort of, Marcus, you asked earlier, some of the mundane things, I guess, that Cosmetics is another thing, fashion and cosmetics and that kind of thing. Yeah, anything that's aesthetic into attraction as well. And when it's in Leo, again, at best, it's a really heart-centered and creative sign for Venus. But it's also associated with self-esteem, Venus, and self-worth. And I think often with Leo, there's the need for external validation and admiration and popularity. And we've already talked about fame and having fans and being loved, and even entitlement at worst. I think often with Leo, there's a sense of entitlement. So when Venus goes retrograde, and when any planet really goes retrograde, there's a chance for you to slow down, to go within, to feel into your heart space. As I already alluded to, Leo, on stage Leo is the performer and the one that wants to have all that validation and to be worshipped. But then there's that off stage Leo, and perhaps Venus in Leo is that time to take that rest off stage, to sort of do some of the inner work around where do you get validation from? Do you get validation from outside, externally? And therefore, are you sensitive to when you don't get the validation, or is there a stronger basis to your idea of your self-worth, basically? And also perhaps an invitation to let go of pride and pridefulness, and basically creativity and aesthetics as well, as we've already said. Who are we trying to impress? Do we dress to impress? And I don't just mean the clothes we wear, but the persona we put on. Are we dressing to impress, or are we being our true sort of authentic self? When you look at the opposite sign to Leo, it's Aquarius, and Aquarius, like all the signs, has its own issues, but authenticity and doing your own thing in your own way and being the original self that you are is a big thing for Aquarius, of course, which is the opposite. I always like to look at the opposite sign to any sign that a planet is in, because it gives you a sense of where that balance might lie. What do you guys think?
I agree with all of that, and that's interesting. I mean, I had just a couple of thoughts sort of on the technical side of things. One was the Venus is pretty close to the star Regulus, not quite on, but within a degree, and Regulus is really bright. I'm not sure if she's actually close in the sky though, because I haven't checked her sort of on the y-axis. I haven't checked her on the declination or whatnot. But in terms of her place on the ecliptic, at 28 degrees Leo is pretty close to Regulus.
So should I add it? Because just before you go to your interpretation, I answer your question.
Thank you.
Get very close to Regulus. It's kind of nearly going to conjunct it, because we know Regulus is on the ecliptic. It's on the ecliptic, right on the ecliptic. So there is a chance Venus always has a chance to go to conjunct. But this time, no. Because retrograde motion approach.
Is she on the same? Is she on the same declination as Regulus at the moment, or anywhere near, or is she much further north or south?
That's what I'm saying. It's going to south. It's going to south. Move southward. That is what, because prepare for retrograde. So just before it gets close to Regulus.
But that's amazing. Okay. That's really interesting. That kind of fits with what you're saying, also with her getting closer and closer to Mars, and then changing my mind. So it's kind of like, because Regulus, that's perfect, Rod. Thank you. So Regulus is the kingmaker star. It's the brightest star in the heavens. It's like the star that raises people up and gives them international fame and all of that kind of stuff. And the fact that Venus is going towards Regulus and then kind of like dips below it and goes retrograde, it's kind of like Venus also going towards her paramour Mars for that clinch, and then like Mars gets all critical and like bitter because he like goes into Virgo and opposes Saturn, and Venus is like, oh no, and sort of like just changes her mind. So it's kind of like, it's what you're saying about the intermission. If this is a play, this would be like the female, let's assume it's like a heteronormative play or whatever, female lead, like, male character, she's pursuing him or something, and like she's like maybe going to moving towards this life of glamour and like high prestige, and then as she gets close to the object of her desire, she sort of sees that he's actually really critical and a bit abusive, and goes, actually no, I forsake all these riches and whatever that you're going to offer me. I'd rather just go back and just reassess my priorities, thank you very much. Do you know what I mean? So if it was a play, it's like like Venus is coming to the end of her act on stage, she's been in the spotlight, all the spotlight starts shutting down, the curtains are closing, she gets wheeled into the wings. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, I don't, in terms of what that would mean, I love what you were saying, Mandy, about the sort of a time to reassess and reflect on your values and on all of that. I think that's all spot on. In terms of events in the world, it'll be interesting to see whether I don't know how that might play out in on a world stage. I mean, I could speculate because this is the chart for the UK, right? So we have Venus ruling the 5th in the 8th. So I mean,
one thing is very interesting. I just took earlier with another colleague, Mandela astrologer Stefano Sarkozy, and we mentioned about that Venus. First, the Venus-Mars aspect, Venus-Mars cycle is always related to the Ukraine-Russia war from the beginning, because they. The second thing, this one thing we have to notice was that when in 1991, I may be wrong, 1991, the chart for the chart for Russia and of a Soviet Union region, that day Venus was retrograde at 22° Leo.
Wow.
Interesting. So in other words, this Venus retrograde is going to have an echo to the chart of the...
Definitely. Okay. Yeah, we don't know what's going to happen, but you're right. You use the word echo. We're definitely going to recode what's going on that time, and that would be pretty interesting in the mountain level. But I don't want to talk too much about mountain here. Sure. So so Mandy, you want to add anything?
I loved your analogy, Marcus, about the play. I thought that's got to be a Shakespeare play. I'm sure Shakespeare did something like that. I couldn't think exactly.
Or a soap opera. I mean, one of the two.
Or a farce, actually. I thought more of kind of like a farce. And when you said about Leo moving away and it's in Virgo, suddenly she saw that this Mars in Leo was this beautiful, amazing sort of thing, and then it goes into Virgo and it's rather ordinary. The object of the desire becomes rather ordinary and perhaps a little bit boring, and you can see there in that chart that Mars is actually opposite Saturn, so a little bit serious, and it's almost like come out to play. I'd see Venus. I don't want to play. I've got serious business to do instead. I'd like cleaning the floor.
Totally. I'd see it as being like Mars also as being critical and a bit bitter here, so exactly that. It might be like going from like this impressive looking CEO, somebody who's always at work and complaining about how much work they've got to do, and they don't even look after themselves properly, and they're like, oh, I've got too much work to do, I can't come out tonight. Do you know what I mean? It's just like suddenly a lot less appealing. So I can see that, but yeah, both ends.
Okay. And I think we've got Venus retrograde. You said, I think, right from the 23rd of July, and that goes on until the 4th of September by my calculation. It's about just over 40 days, 40 plus days.
Wow. So during these 40 days, we have time to, a little bit reflect about our value, about the beauty, about how we see the world, maybe the world peace, or how to find the inner peace with ourselves. Also, that would be related to.
I love all that, and but bear in mind, during this whole time, we have two planets in the sign that's overcoming Venus. We have Jupiter and Uranus, both in Taurus, and I think they're significant because they're in the 10th sign from Venus. So in traditional astrology, that was really significant. That was called an overcoming square. So in ancient astrology, it was thought to be good to have Jupiter in the 10th position, because that would sort of be like you sort of put your higher judgment above your transient desires, and so Venus and Jupiter were both good, but it was traditionally better to have Jupiter in that dominant position because Jupiter was thought to be this planet of overall judgment and getting a sort of overall view of things. And then Uranus there is this sort of shaker upper, this sort of new way of doing things. So I think this whole reflection period where we may be reflecting on our own, what makes us attractive, what we're attracted to, what our values are, what what makes us valuable, kind of thing, what makes us shine, how, what, and also, are we attracted to things because they're really worth it or because it's fool's gold, that kind of contemplation. It's like the Uranus Taurus overcoming thing will kind of, I think it'll bring a positive outcome to those reflections, and maybe some unusual new insights, and maybe some of those insights and some of the results of this period of sort of reflection. And also, by the way, in Venus retrograde, sometimes relationships go a bit squiffy. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean there's suddenly a flurry of divorces. It just means because Venus is going into underworld phase, it's like people often sort of like start thinking, is this right for me? A lot of the results of that might be sort of practically quite good. Maybe a load of people will just completely redesign their wardrobe, for example. Do you know what I mean?
I like that idea.
Oh yeah, good clear out. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
I've got a wardrobe full of clothes, and 90% of those clothes I haven't worn since before the pandemic. They're things that when I had an office corporate job that I had to. I need to get rid of them, right?
Jupiter, Uranus in Taurus, wardrobe revolution. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just like,
Mind you, if I do too much Uranus in Taurus, I'll probably get rid of everything. I'll have nothing to wear. You can throw the baby out with the bathwater with Uranus all too easily.
All right. I think last couple minutes, I think last part of today, I think I would definitely want to cover a little bit, at least a few words about the nodal axis changing sign, because we know that I think it's around the 17th, I think, or 17th, yes, the evening for UK is the 17th July. The North Node will step into 29-degree Aries, and the South Node will step into the 29-degree of Libra. Believe me or not, being an astrologer for nearly 30 years, but I still not used to visualizing and talk about nodal axis retrograde motion. So I was like, am I saying the right?
Yeah. No, it's weird, isn't it? Like,
I think it's the 12th of July. I think it's a few days before the 17th that they actually move. I think they move on the 12th of July.
Oh, okay.
So before the new moon.
Well, no, because this is the new moon chart, Mandy, and they're still in. Or maybe they do. Do they dip back? Do they dip back in? Or something?
Maybe they don't. Oh, maybe I've got it wrong. I checked earlier.
You know what? Let me do it.
You might not have it wrong, Mandy, because the nodes sometimes do. They wobble. They sometimes have odd little stations and stuff.
Depending on how you set them.
Exactly. Yeah. Let me do it. I think it's.
So for
I think it's 12. Yes, Monday, you're right.
I'm
I know 18th. Sorry.
18th.
Sorry.
Okay. So
the 18th. Okay.
Yeah.
That's
you're all wrong.
Yeah.
Yay! I don't know where I got the 12th from. I get confused with the backward motion. I don't know.
It doesn't matter.
That's what I say. That's what I say. That every time when I look, especially for node, I easily make mistake because it's not the usual motion we used to calculate. So our brain is sometimes like go to the easy way. We usually think that no, that's wrong. So how about this North Node, Mandy? Do you have anything to share with us about this North Node moving to Aries?
Yeah, North Node going into Aries, into 29 degrees of Aries. Like you say, when we expect a sign change, we expect it to go to 0. So is this discombobulating? But yeah, Aries, of course. So I mean, the Aries axis, you're on the Aries and Libra axis. So I guess the North Node, amongst other things, represents what you need to bring in, what you need to work on, and potentially what you need to let go of with the South Node. So the focus is on the energies that you need to bring in, but also balance. The Aries balance, Aries Libra balance. So I mean, Aries and the North Node in Aries, thoughts about, are you self-motivated? Are you self-sufficient? Do you need to let go of relying on other people to do things for you? Leadership and spontaneity and following your own interests and being aware of what you want rather than what you want for others or what others want for you, and finding the kind of balance between that. And again, it's very much about, we've talked a lot about relationships, haven't we? And it is the relationship aspect as well. It's about self and other. How are you being true to yourself, and how are you pleasing others or giving your power away to others? And individuality, of course, and sovereignty is another sort of Aryan theme. There's a few little ideas.
Marcus?
No, I like all that. I think I was trying to think of it in terms of sort of more and less, with the North Node being more and the South Node being less. So with a range of possibilities, you could have more war, less peace. Bad. You could have more advocacy and less diplomacy. You could have more sincerity and less platitudes. Do you know what I mean? So you've kind of got the Aries range is, of course, you've got an amplification of all the stuff you were talking about, Mandy, an amplification of sincerity, but also an amplification of drive and potentially aggression. And with the sort of diminishment of Libra, with the South Node going into Libra, you've got some maybe less emphasis on diplomacy, but also less emphasis on some of the less sincere, because Libra's shadow is perhaps being not so honest, is being more indirect, is being a bit more vacillating. So it depends. It really depends on, again, how it hits people's charts and individual countries. But I suspect on the world stage, I'm not sure that this combination is necessarily what the world needs right now. But
more or less peace.
More advocacy really right now. But I don't know. It depends where you're coming from. I mean, for me, I really like this. I've got some nice planets in Aries and some not some nice stuff in Libra. So I'm like, okay, this is cool. But I think it depends how it hits things. But yeah, I think that the positive side of this is the North Node going into Aries is going to make sort of taking affirmative action a lot more compelling for people, and just talking about it seem less compelling. And that could be great, or it could be freaking awful, depending on the circumstances.
I love that actually. I'm going to steal that, if you don't mind, Marcus. I've not heard that before about the nose, that more and that less. Another way of thinking about the nose is to put the word but as well in between, so it's kind of like, this is what I want, but that is what you want.
Yeah, that I like.
Who's going to give way, you know, and that and but sort of question. Interesting.
Yeah, it is very interesting, especially this axis is about the between individual, me, myself, and how I work with other people, competitive or cooperation, or even in the the relationship, because the Libra and the Aries as always have played into this. And then when you have that North Node to encourage you to be more about yourself, when Marcus talking about people are kind of taking more action, and I want to do this, I want to do that, but never forget about South Node. The Libra is there, and it requests, it demands the justice and the well balance. So people were saying, "How about me? How about me?" So that is very interesting. We try to balance between that you and me, or individual and the team or something. I don't know, probably not team, but fair. Try to be fair. Play fair.
Other people. One of the things I sort of visualized, obviously the North Node in sort of Vedic astrology is Ketu. It's the devouring head of the dragon, who's always hungry and never sated because has no body. And Ketu is the nether regions, the other end of the dragon that excretes. And so, but one visualization that I use is for North Node is like a magnifying glass, where you sort of or maybe it's more like a telescope, where you're looking at vast areas of sky and blowing them up and bringing them close to you. Whereas I think the South Node is like looking at things through the wrong end of a telescope. It's like, so you're sort of shrinking everything down. So south node is like a little perfect miniature version of things. It shrinks everything down, so it's like a perfect little miniature. So the south node, even though it like makes less of, it's sort of really perfectionist. It makes everything like really small and detail. And the north node is like big picture, but stuff the detail. We don't have time for that. We want to get as much into this picture as we can put, and then you lose detail. So the north node, which is more, loses the wood for the trees, or is that the other way around? It sort of like loses the trees for the wood, really. It just sort of like it sees the big picture and it forgets the detail. And the south node is all detail and no big picture. So I think the other end of this is like, while we're getting into all the Aries vibes of like being really advocating and like going for it, and like, you know, everybody's inner warrior is getting amped up because of the crusade, whatever that is. The south node in Libra is like going to be obsessing over little details of what we need to get the situation right, and actually kind of forgetting the whole big picture. So that either end of the nodal scale is unbalanced, and both ends need each other. So it's kind of a, but and that, what you're saying, Rod, though, is like, as you're saying, like the danger that we could forget about needing to be polite and needing to take into account other people's point of view, and forgetting that Libra end. In 9 years' time, whatever we do in the next 2 years or whatever is going to be flipped around, and we're going to have to deal with the echo of that, you know, the reverberation of whatever goes in the next couple of years. So yeah.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because another thing that Libra is associated with is courtesy and politeness and slight kind of polish, whereas Aries is a bit more kind of rough and raw. So again, making that balance, you know, there's going for it in that authentic way, that rough, raw way, but smoothing it off a little bit. And then there's a point where Libra can be so polished and courteous that it comes off as inauthentic, you know. So you've got that kind of balance to be made as well. I think you're trying to think of the right word. Refinement. I think that's it. Libra is kind of more refined, whereas Aries is more raw, and that's not a value judgment, because again, there's that balance. If you over refine something, you think about ultra processed foods, right? If you over refine something, it can be not so good for you. Yeah, totally. That's a great thought, man. The other thought, it's gone out of my head. It'll pop back in. As you were talking about that, Mandy, I just had that thought. I need to say that, but it's fallen out of my head. It was something about the nature of the nodes, but it'll wander back in. It's fine.
Okay, but you may go back soon. So during this time, I think from what we just find out is the 18th of July until I think next year, 2025, January 2025, the whole this time we will have the North Node in Aries and South Node in Libra. So, you know, try to play fair, but yes, you can be yourself. You can go to get what you want, but like Marcus say, don't lose the forest.
Don't lose the trees for the wood. It's the wrong way around.
Yeah, don't lose the tree for the wood.
So in other words, just because you're focusing on the bigger picture of whatever you're advocating for, or whatever cause or like goal that you are aiming at, don't then neglect those little details of being polite and taking into account other people, maybe your opponents. Maybe just don't just willfully disrespect people or that kind of stuff. This was the point. It's that North Node blows things up, South Node reduces them. So the traditional context, the nuance to this was, it really depends what planet they come into contact with, because actually it can be good to have the South Node come into contact with a difficult planet, because it can kind of like reduce it. It can take the air out of it. And the North Node, if you've got it on a good planet, it can sort of like magnify it a little bit. But I think they both can distort. And I think the North Node distorts in the direction of carelessness and obsessiveness, and the south node distorts in the direction of over scrupulous attention to detail, like perfectionism. That's the word I want. The south node skews in the direction of perfectionism and maybe minimizing, sort of like a sense of not necessarily not being good enough, but more sort of like all that, yeah, because it's perfectionist. It's like this isn't good enough. This isn't enough. You know, we need to get down to more and more little details. So yeah, I don't know. Nodes in general, but
wow, I think it's nearly 9 o'clock, and we've been spending hours on this month's transit, and I really enjoyed. But I think for both of all of us, we probably need a little bit of rest. And thanks everyone, and thanks Mandy, and thanks Marcus to talk about today. Bring us like your observation of this month's transit, about the new moon and the full moon, and also we cover quite a lot of Venus retrograde and the nodal axis changing the sign. So, well, I think next month we will come back on the let me double check the calendar. I don't want to make mistake. Yes, the 4th of August, and then we will come back with our monthly transit, and that would be also again right after the super full moon, and would be interesting to share with you our observation about all this super moon thingy. Okay, and then next week, I think is the 14th of July, we will have our usual Worldscope Mundane Astrologer panel to come to join us to discuss about what's happening now. I think definitely we will be a little bit crazy because of everything happening now is so crazy. So many things happening at the same time. So, well, thanks for watching our monthly transit podcast, and thanks to everyone to join us. See you next time. Bye.
Thanks. Bye, guys. Bye.